Paper 1 is the reading component of the HKDSE English Language exam. There are two parts, A and B, in Paper 1. All candidates must do Part A and then choose either Part B1, the easier section, or Part B2, the more difficult section. Candidates attempting Parts A and B2 will be able to attain the full range of possible levels, while Level 4 will be the highest level attainable by candidates attempting Parts A and B1. The total number of candidates entering Paper 1 mock exam was 1,439, of whom 20% chose to do Part B1, while 80% chose Part B2. 9% of candidates attained Level 5 or above, while 52% of them attained Level 3 or above. Part A, the compulsory section. There was one reading passage in Part A about the attempted ascent to Mount Everest as documented by John Krakauer in his book Into Thin Air, and how the conditions for such quests have changed over the years. Candidates performed generally well in the following questions, requiring basic understanding of the text for giving specific single-word answers. Q4, stating peak as synonymous with top of the mountain. Q6, locating a synonym. Subquestion 2 of Q7, writing climb or verbs of similar meanings to fill in the gap between could and Everest. Q14, choosing an appropriate adjective to describe the rescuer's actions. And subquestion 4 of Q15, stating exponentially as the synonym of rapidly. However, candidates had difficulties in tackling the following questions. Q3, a factual question which required candidates to state why Krakauer went to Everest according to paragraph 3. This question posed difficulties for some candidates since they simply copied the information from text starting with because of, without stating that Krakauer's purpose was to document the phenomenon. Q8, which required candidates to have a more holistic understanding of the text, to be able to identify the 1996 tragedy as the event described in Krakauer's book. Only rare candidates could give the correct answer. Those were the candidates who could react on a broader textual level. Subquestions 1 and 2 of Q9, which required candidates to state the pros and cons of hiring shepherds as guides. The questions should be fairly straightforward, and the answer could be easily located in paragraph 8. However, some candidates quoted additional yet irrelevant information from the same paragraph, which resulted in losing marks in both subquestions. Q11 was a metaphor question. Less than one-third of candidates stated the correct answer, traffic jam, in subquestion 1, and fewer managed to explain its meaning in the context of mountain climbing in subquestion 2. Q12 was a factual question asking candidates to correct the mistakes in a summary and put a tick in the box for one of the lines containing no mistake. Subquestion 1 was the most difficult part for candidates, as most candidates could not identify the mistake in to predictably scale the mountain by deriving the adverb safely from the text. Q18 required candidates to explain why Everest quests are so long and expensive. Many candidates unexpectedly omitted the words acclimatizing to, which was immediately preceded by the causal conjunction since, and began their answers with Everest elevation can take days. Both Q20 and Q22 asked about candidates' own views. In Q20, some candidates stated their stance and quoted information from the article without giving their own explanations. In Q22, some candidates gave answers such as reduced cost, and wanting to find the causes of the numerous deaths. These were not sufficient reasons for people to decide to climb Everest in particular. There were 2 texts in Part B1. Text 2 was a website about cooking classes. Text 3 was a blog entry concerning clean eating. Candidates taking this session performed relatively well in questions that required factual understanding of explicitly stated details, such as Q27, Q29, and Q40. However, they did less satisfactorily in the following questions. Q24 involved a pun of word marketing, as used in a literal sense in the course title, Marketing with Mark, as going to the wet market with Mark. Most candidates encountered difficulties in working out the pun. Therefore, only very few candidates were able to get the correct answer for this question. Q33, one of the most challenging questions in this section. Many candidates failed to answer it correctly because they included the word albeit before the answer. It is oversimplified without knowing the meaning of the word albeit. Q34 was a challenging question. In order to complete the sentence grammatically, candidates need to understand the reason for dieting and give the correct answer lose weight. Q37 comprised 2 factual sub-questions with relatively implicit answers. Some candidates did not fully understand the paragraph and failed to capture the adjectives unrealistic and intimidating in the text. Q41 was a reference question. Most candidates performed poorly because they missed the modifier added before sugar, despite stating the other correct noun phrase, refined carbohydrates, as part of their answers. Candidates are advised to be more careful when extracting specific details from the text, instead of arbitrarily leaving out modifiers, which may be a necessary part of the answer. Q44 was a summary cloze task with 4 sub-questions, in which candidates could use words taken from the specified paragraphs without having to change the form. Sub-question 4, however, was correctly answered by the fewest candidates in Part B1. The answer better should not be a difficult word for most candidates, but a broader understanding of the paragraph would be necessary for the candidates to identify the answer. Part B2, the more difficult section. The reading passages for Part B2 was about a company which develops custom-made voices for people with voice disorder. Candidates performed well in the following. Sub-question 1 of Q50, a factual question, and sub-questions 1 and 4 of Q60, a true, false, not given question. However, they found the following questions particularly challenging. Q57, which tested candidates' lexical interpretation of the name Bespoke Voices, where a pun was used. Many candidates directly copied chunks of words after Bespoke Voices in the text. Very few candidates demonstrated their knowledge of the meaning of bespoke as an adjective. Q59 was an inference question which required candidates to state 4 things without a specific order about the procedure of a kidney donation that could be inferred from the process of voice donation. Some candidates did not seem to understand the question and just quoted the 4 features about voice donation verbatim. Some candidates gave the correct answer regarding the presence of a screening process and equipment for kidney donation, but failed to do so for the other 2 sub-questions. Only very few candidates were able to fully understand the requirement of the question and to apply their everyday knowledge to validate their own answers. Q63 was a challenging question. It asked candidates to find a word or phrase to replace completing. Some candidates failed to include the preposition on in their answer, putting finishing touches. Candidates are recommended to try putting the replacement word in the original text to check which words it replaces, both contextually and grammatically. Q67 is both an inference and a vocabulary question, which tested candidates' understanding of the interjection or fill. Only about 1/5 of the candidates knew the meaning of fill itself or managed to deduce the change in emotions from the context. Paper 3. Paper 3 is the listening and integrated skills component of the HKDSE English language exam. There are 2 parts, A and B, in this paper. All candidates must do Part A and then choose either Part B1, the easier section, or Part B2, the more difficult section. The total number of candidates entering Paper 3 mock exam was 1,424, of whom 12.5% chose to do Part B1, while 87.5% chose Part B2. 9% of candidates attained Level 5 or above, while 54% of them attained Level 3 or above. Part A, the compulsory session. In Part A, candidates are required to listen to 4 recordings about the Public Transport Advisory Council, a hypothetical organization which worked for improving public transport services in Hong Kong. In Task 1, candidates were required to fill in a summary of meeting while listening to Cynthia Wu, who worked for the Public Transport Advisory Council, talks to her colleagues Maria and Oscar on the findings of a recent survey. Most candidates performed disappointingly in item 5 and 6, which required slightly longer answers. Candidates failed to observe the prompts for the blanks and fill in answers which are not grammatical. In Task 2, Cynthia was meeting with Arthur, the director of the Public Transport Advisory Council, to present her ideas for a new website. Item 15 was very challenging. The correct answer was Guide to Public Transport System. Many candidates wrote answers like Guides of S for public transport, which carry other meanings and lost the mark. Candidates are advised to take note of the prompts in the various parts of the task and subsequently observe the grammaticality of the answers. In Task 3, Cynthia and Oscar were watching 3 videos so as to come up with ideas for the Council's newsletter article. Item 33 appears to be a big challenge to most candidates. Only very few candidates could spell the country name, the Netherlands, correctly. In Task 4, Cynthia was interviewing Dr. Turner, an environmental impact consultant, for a report. Despite that, about half of the 13 items in this task required straightforward answers. Candidates' performance was not satisfactory at all. Item 41, 48, 51, and 52 were poorly performed items in this task. Many candidates gave the wrong answers as they lacked a good vocabulary. Candidates are advised to build up their vocabulary by viewing authentic English materials more frequently. Part B. In Part B, candidates adopted the role as Sammy Yip, the Secretary for the Interschool Science and Technology Society. Part B1, the easier section. In Task 5, candidates were required to complete a checklist for modifications to the website design for the science fair. Candidates performed generally well in the first part of the checklist, in particular the items which were obtainable in data files. In Task 6, candidates were required to write up an announcement about the science fair for the Society's newsletter. Most candidates lost mark for the prize, as they mixed up the options of a weekend at Shenzhen Space Camp with lifetime free admission to Hong Kong Science Museum in Data File 4, Data File 7, and Data File 10. Candidates should be careful of the target audience and the tone of an announcement. In Task 7, candidates were required to write an email to Priscilla Jones, who was inquiring about the science fair for her daughter, Monica. Candidates performed quite well in providing factual answers to the question. Also, in terms of coherence and organization and appropriacy, candidates had better performance in this task than previous tasks. This could be due to the explicit hint in Priscilla Jones' emails that candidates were guided to respond to each of the questions in a sequence. Part B2, the more difficult section. Task 8 required candidates to write a report on the sponsors and financing matter of the science fair. To do the task well, candidates are strongly advised to carefully read the instruction and go through all of the data file items before they plan their writing. Task 9 required candidates to write an email to Joshua Fung, the contact person at Kowloon College. The average number of content points attained was even worse than that of the previous task. Very few candidates have shown good awareness of the scenario and the role of the recipient of this email. Candidates' overall weak performance in this task could also be due to their lack of exposure to and experience of organizing school activities. Candidates are strongly advised to study the data file more carefully and to take a more active part in co-curricular activities in order to gain relevant experience. Task 10 required candidates to write an introductory speech for Emily Zhu according to her notes. Candidates attained more than half of the content points on average. To do the task well, candidates are advised to focus their writing on Emily's suggested structure and the values of the STEM education. Some candidates included chunks of irrelevant information and lost marks in coherence and organization. Candidates are also advised to pay attention to their tone and style in order to score a high mark in appropriacy. As this introductory speech should be targeted at the students and guests at the science fair organized by the Interschool Science and Technology Society, it was not appropriate to mention your alumni had won the fair for the occasion. Recommendations for Part B. Candidates are strongly advised to improve their handwriting. It was observed that many candidates did not write legibly, and some even intended to blur their answers which they could not spell properly. Candidates are reminded that all markers in this mock exam and in HKDSE are obliged not to make any guess on candidates' works. Any unclear answers will immediately be marked as incorrect.